The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a novella by Robert Louis Stevenson about the troubled Dr. Henry Jekyll, who is struggling with his moral identity. In an effort to separate the bad part of himself from the good, he creates these scientific experiments that result in the apparition of another being, Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde is a deformed-looking man who is pure evil. He begins wreaking havoc on the town. One of Dr. Jekyll's oldest friends, Mr. Utterson the lawyer, is very troubled by Jekyll's will, in which the whole of Jekyll's estates is given to Mr. Hyde in the result of his death or disappearance for more than 3 months. At the end of the book, Jekyll is killed, and soon after, Hyde kills himself. The entire explanation of Jekyll's experiments is revealed to Mr. Utterson in the letter at the end of the book. A classic is a work that is essentially timeless. Despite the changing of time, the central theme is still relevant today. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, the term classic is used for the literature of any language in a period notable for the excellence and enduring quality of its writer's works. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde is a classic because the main theme of struggle with one's moral identity and the struggle between good and bad is one that can still be related to. The 2017 movie starring Sean Paul Piccinino is very accurate in its interpretation of the book. In sacrificing quality for replication, even down to the wording, it stays almost exactly true to the book. The scene where Utterson is reading Dr. Lanyon's letter detailing the viewing of Jekyll's transformation and the explanation of his experiments is the climax of the story, where all is revealed. The movie is relatively true to what is described in the letter. It shows us the scene as it plays out. Much of the scene is just about quoted word for word from the book. However, the movie shows Hyde and Lanyon as a little more confrontational than described in the book.
Oh, God, no! This is me, Lanyon. Henry Jekyll.
The book is set in Soho, London, during the Victorian era in the late 1800s. This was an era with very strict moral views. One reason for the creation of Mr. Hyde was Jekyll's longing to free himself of his immorality and conform to society's moral views. Jekyll is a wealthy man and lives in a grand mansion. However, Mr. Hyde resides in his dingy laboratory. This contrast serves as another symbol of the good and evil inside Henry Jekyll. Another aspect of the Victorian era is the advancement of science. Dr. Jekyll's rogue scientific experiments are a representation of those advancements taking place. Robert Louis Stevenson was born in Edinburgh, Scotland, on November 13, 1850, to Thomas and Margaret Stevenson. Stevenson was brought up as a Presbyterian. Presbyterianism is similar to Calvinism because they believe in predestination. The sharp contrast between sinners and those destined for salvation parallels Jekyll's desire to separate the bad from the good through the creation of Hyde. Mr. Utterson is one of the few respectable, virtuous, and overall good characters in the book. He resembles the kind of strictly religious people that Stevenson grew up around in Edinburgh. In the beginning description of Mr. Utterson, Stevenson says, "He was austere with himself, drank gin when he was alone to mortify a taste for vintages, and though he enjoyed the theater, had not crossed the doors of one for 20 years. Utterson's self-denial is a similar characteristic to that of the Presbyterians and Calvinists that Stevenson was brought up a part of. Also, Utterson's self-denial can be seen as a representation of repression. The problem of repression in Dr. Jekyll is what initiated the creation of Mr. Hyde.